Lights, put on my lights. Good evening. It's evening out there to everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope everybody is feeling good. Couple of matters to get off the top before we really get into the issues at hand for the day. Just couple observations. Couple things happened over the weekend. The Labour Party, which is the biggest party, which is the ruling party in St. Kitts and Nevis, had its convention. I'm going to brush this aside very quickly. In terms of the fact that I'm disappointed, I made, I think, two comments under the post. I tuned in early, and it was Carnival. And if you like Carnival, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But my post was like, at the end of all of this, what is gonna be the reality? What we're gonna be facing as far as cost of living, as far as equity and equality, as far as opportunity. It wasn't for me a serious event. Granted, maybe that's due to the fact that I'm looking at numerous political events all over the place, and it is kind of coloring my take. But for me, it was not a serious attempt to discuss politics. I do not feel like that is how a convention is supposed to look. I don't feel like, as I said, it's not about Makajambi. It's about really like discussing the people, the issues of the people. I would have spoken about this with regards to town hall meetings and the fact that we going to town hall meetings, are tuning into town hall meetings, and the politicians are doing most of the dictating. Those in authority are doing most of the dictating. It's not about the people. It's not about the people coming up there and expressing themselves and trying to contribute through discourse and through ideas and having a say and having more of, rather than a representative democracy, rather injecting some direct democracy into the proceedings. The possibility that maybe laws and policies could flow from the people up to the politicians and not the other way around. And so I myself tuning in. I tuned in and I quickly tuned out. As I'm saying, for me, all of the pageantry is not necessary. And I know I'm speaking about the Labour Party now, but this perspective goes to any particular party who attempts to do this type of activity. These things are about the people, about how you're going to represent them, and about how you're going to make their life more prosperous. Having said that, I'm going to quickly go on to a different topic, but I was scrolling through social media this weekend and I found a conversation Mr. Gums shared, which happened, I think, on WinFM. Give them the credit. I was happy for the discussion. Someone who, I've known, like I've seen the person, but I can't say that I know this person intimately. But there was a Mr. Michael Blake. I think the show was Inside the News, and I want to give WinFM a lot of credit. I don't know if that's the general tone of the show, I don't know what the show is trying to achieve, but certainly that discussion was, I think, a very good discussion. They were discussing whether or not we need a new paradigm in St. Kitts and Nevis politics. And it kind of fit in to what I was saying earlier about the Labour Party. Do you want your convention to be an event in terms of music and makajumbi and dancing? Or are we gonna have these events come together as civilized adults and really discuss from a party perspective how we are gonna push forward into really a change, a very fast paced world as far as the changes that are occurring, as far as the things that you have to respond to in order to create a prosperous society. So uh, I found the discussion very good. I also want to give respect to all of the panelists. I think I got to understand each one of them a little more. I was disappointed in some of the answers, but at the end of the day, the discussion overall was necessary. The discussion was a good discussion. And as I say, I got to hear some of the perspectives of what, how these persons feel about changing the status quo, the current circumstances of how we do politics in St. Kitts and Nevis. They touched on a number of things that we have discussed, which was also, I'm happy about that. The need for example, campaign financing laws, the need for, as I mentioned, would have mentioned earlier, more direct democracy. I think at this time, there is, from some people, they would like more information, more accountability. As I say, there are circumstances in which you could create a society where laws and policies flow from the bottom, and then they go up to the legislature to consider how best they can accommodate these things. And it, these things could also have an effect in self-policing. There are countries, and you wouldn't believe how much of how much of a responsibility the village, the local municipality, the local, like basically, in our terms, the parish would be responsible for keeping theft under control. Societies where women would tell you, listen, went down the road last night, 11 o'clock, come back home 1 o'clock. Nobody trouble me. Walk everywhere, had lights, people, and I'll try help me. So, as I'm saying, there's a number of things that we could pull out, going into the videos for today and what we're going to achieve today. I would have made a post on the weekend about, I'm stunned that none of the opposition members have looked at the IMF report and started to probe and make some statements. Let me read this comment here. Could we, the masses, demand that our elected officials implement laws in relation to campaign funding, or is it solely up to the conscience of those proposing to be elected? Well, the first and well, I want to answer that in two ways. First of all, the power is always with the people. Even in countries where you hear them say that they got dictators, they also have to answer to the people. So if we do start to get enough people educated and start to demand that we want to have campaign finance laws and other things, we definitely we can affect the legislature. The other way, which is it is important to understand that we could affect the legislature, is we need to get from politicians concrete ideas. If you have an issue like, for example, this campaign financing, when you do happen to get a politician in front of you, when you happen to get somebody who does go to cabinet meetings, it could be the cabinet secretary, all of these different people. When you get a permanent secretary, when you get these high level cabinet officials around you, it is important that you start to inject in them your thoughts and look and listen to the feedback that you get from them. Why it is important is because some of them will tell you honestly they can't do it and they are not interested. And those people you could immediately cross off of the list. What we have to foster is you got to have have your concept, and I'm saying reasonable concepts, so just like this campaign finance thing. Have your concept, be able to describe what you want, and do not stop until you meet officials or you change officials' mind into understanding that these campaign funding laws are necessary. It is also important. I heard this saying recently by, I think it's from Che Guevara. If you are a revolutionary, you got to constantly educate yourself. Eh? And one thing I want to tell you about the campaign funding laws, this is to ensure that your politicians are not bought off by private interests and also foreign agents. Is the same reason why um, dual citizens can't run for election. You might have foreign allegiances. So going from that fundamental principle, that that should be your rationale, and you need to um, at least promote the idea, even if you the politician who you don't support promotes this idea. It is important to have somebody out there who does, because when you get options, no, even who not been a think about it has to take you seriously. uh, I was saying before that I was surprised that none of the opposition figures have spoken about the IMF report. I was there thinking to myself this weekend, man, it's gotta be about time. And I was greeted, and the report is out. And so, in between the videos, I'm gonna share some of what they are saying in the report and what you will start to see implemented and rolled out as if they are original thoughts. The first video is about AI. We've been hearing a lot about data centers and whether or not they want to build a data center in Nevis. All same good for that matter. So I just want people to understand some of the circumstances. And one of the big things about AI and data centers is how much water it consumes. So this is the context what we're gonna look at the first video.
What happens when you ask ChatGPT to reword an email? Your prompt goes to a data center and triggers a wave of computations on hundreds of servers. As those servers get hit with requests from thousands of users at once, they start to heat up. To keep them from overheating, data centers typically cool them with water, fans, and air conditioners. OpenAI doesn't publicly share exactly how much energy or water its models consume, but one researcher we spoke to put together some estimates. For the simplest tasks, like rewording your email, their popular GPT-5 model uses as much electricity as it takes to power a 3-watt LED light bulb for around 20 minutes, and a little less than a teaspoon of water. For one person and one prompt, it may not seem like much. OpenAI says it receives 2.5 billion queries a day. Add those up, and at the very least, you're looking at enough water to meet the daily drinking needs of all the people in Monterrey, Mexico, and enough energy to binge watch Netflix for more than 3,000 years. The number of
So what you got to think about is every time you press a button or connected to the internet, a teaspoon of water is required to cool down the server. And you hear how much prompts uh, open AI said that does get. So think about all of them transactions. So this is why I'm saying the water circumstance has to be figured out.
AI users is expected to roughly double over the next half decade. And as AI usage is increasing, so too is the number of data centers needed to support it. That's why researchers are racing to find new and better ways to keep server racks cool, like sinking data centers deep into the ocean and even launching them into space. Cooling has always been a core part of how data centers work. Even one of the first computers in the 1940s had vacuum tubes which were cooled by fans and ventilation. Despite being literally trillions of times more powerful, the data centers of today still look kind of similar. The big difference is they're using a lot more energy. Nearly 50% of their entire energy use can go towards keeping the CPUs that process your prompts, also known as microchips, from overheating. This Google data center in the US state of Oregon is large enough to run computations needed for AI applications.
The other side of the AI thing, well, the data center circumstance is the energy requirements. So geothermal, solar, even some wind energy, all of those things, the consumption. And the reason why you would have to pay attention to this is because everywhere where these things are have popped up so far, the the cost has been spread basically to the population. So your energy prices would increase just because there are data centers.
A typical data center covers an area of about 9,000 square meters. This one is 13 times bigger. It's called a hyperscale data center.
The scale of the AI data centers, which we call hyperscalers, is so much larger than the data centers that we have been living with pretty much without even noticing them for the past decade plus.
That's Professor Scanlon from the University of Wisconsin, who wrote this paper about the hidden environmental cost of AI data centers. Packing in more servers means a lot more cooling. Google's hyperscaler in the Dalles, Oregon, used nearly a third of its city's water supply in 2021, according to public records obtained by the state's largest newspaper. Relying on water for cooling is a common approach. That's why when you look closely at this map, you see big clusters of data centers here, close to fresh water. Nearly a tenth of the world's data centers are in this part of the US. The region is called the Great Lakes and is home to 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water, much of it naturally cold. Using it lets data centers spend far less electricity on cooling. The water gets sprayed into rooftop cooling towers, allowed to cool naturally through evaporation, and then used to keep servers from overheating. Fewer fans and less electricity, the method is called evaporative cooling.
Well, maybe maybe the plan is to remove all of the water sources because if you could see from Banki, video, it looked like they're filling in the pan. So maybe the plan is to fill in all where there would be any water resources so that no data center could come near us. So we might be witnessing genius moves at this moment in time. But this is another consideration. As you see, they generally keep them around large bodies of natural water. I don't know if over on the peninsula would be a move. Nothing over there. It's Jamaica shot.
The trade off: a lot more water.
Less than 1% of the water in the Great Lakes is annually renewed, and many ecosystems, city drinking water, industries rely on a relatively stable level of the lakes. So the water that can be taken out for use by humans, it has to fit within that water budget.
Now let's look at the other side of this trade off. Google's data center in Mesa, Arizona sits in one of the driest regions in the United States. So they went with air cooling. Giant fans pushing air across the servers. No water, but a lot more electricity.
The data centres in Ireland are consuming a fifth of all of our electricity.
Rosie Leonard is an environmental activist from Ireland.
So it's really, really high. So they are directly causing a strain on the energy system. And the public is paying for this through increased bills.
Research found that using evaporative rather than air cooling can reduce the energy needed to cool a data center by between 30 and 60%. But as new AI models drive data centers to pack in more powerful chips and denser servers, they're generating more heat than ever, meaning cooling needs to work even harder to keep up. Or it can work smarter. One solution is to directly cool the microchips where most heat is generated, instead of the whole server room. Direct-to-chip cooling uses a water-based liquid coolant. This circulates across metal plates, typically made from copper or aluminum, stuck onto the chips. Companies say using liquid to absorb heat from chips in a recirculating closed-loop system cools more effectively than chilling the air.
Liquids move heat faster than air does. Air is very light and liquids are very dense. So the same volume moving through the system, liquid can remove way more of the heat.
That's Maxie Reynolds from the data center company Subsea Cloud. We'll hear more from her later. Research found that direct-to-chip cooling can reduce the power used by server fans by up to 80% compared with air-based methods. And the liquid itself remains sealed in a closed loop, so no on-site water consumption is necessary to make it happen. It looks like this method is becoming the new norm for large-scale data center providers. Microsoft is building what it calls its most powerful AI data center in Wisconsin, in that same Great Lakes region. They say this facility will house hundreds of thousands of processors, and they're using direct-to-chip cooling to save on water. Studies by McKinsey and Future Market Insights estimate that by the end of 2030, direct-to-chip cooling build-outs will represent about a third of the data center cooling sector. But what if you could take that idea even further and dunk an entire server into cooling liquid? I know what you're thinking. Tossing an AI server rack into a cold water bath is a sure way to fry the system. So for immersion cooling to work, data center providers use special oily liquids that won't conduct electricity or cause metal to rust. Gigabyte, a data center services provider in Taiwan, says cooling its servers in this bubbling liquid allows them to be stacked more densely. With the direct-to-chip cooling method we explored earlier, some fans are still needed. With immersion cooling, there's no air around the server, removing the need for fans altogether. One operator in Athens, Greece, has reported that over 90% of the energy that the data center uses goes strictly to crunching computations instead of cooling, a big jump from the roughly 50% seen in many traditional air-cooled data centers. Industry researchers found that the immersion-cooled data center sector was already valued at $1.7 billion in 2025. That represents a third of the liquid-cooled data center market as a whole. In the frosty harbors of Denmark, one operator is taking cooling to a whole new level by plunging data centers directly into the frigid waters of the North Sea.
And by placing them subsea, we eliminate the electrically driven cooling. So we see about a 40% reduction in the power that's consumed, and then about 40% decrease in the carbon emissions.
There's Maxie again. Her company's shipping container-like capsules weigh 46 tons. Inside, high-density server racks hold over 1,100 processors, suspended in, you guessed it, a non-conductive oily coolant goo. The heat this coolant absorbs from the computing components quickly emanates outward into the frosty waters just outside. The modules can be connected, for example, to offshore wind turbines to power the computations, though no electricity is needed for cooling. No fans, no lights, and no pumps for circulating the gooey coolant. This means
This is amazing. I would like to know how much that they cost. But this is amazing.
that 99% of electricity goes directly to computing power, according to the company. There are problems with underwater data centers, though.
Every day, there's some GPU that fails due to plenty of different reasons.
Peng Fei Li is a researcher focused on AI's environmental impact.
If it's in the ground, we can easily replace them or fix the errors on these GPUs or some other hardwares. But if it's undersea, then it's kind of hard to maintain.
Surveys show that over half of facilities have experienced at least one outage in the past 3 years. Though most of these are minor hiccups, it shows that problems can come from all angles, like memory errors, network glitches, power issues, or even natural disasters. But there's one more data center frontier, and this one goes far beyond the limits of Earth itself. Operators are exploring the idea of shooting data centers into space to orbit around our planet. The idea is they can rely on solar power for their computing, while the cold of space would help to naturally keep the servers cool. By staying close to Earth's surface, data could travel back and forth using optical lasers without too much lag time. In 2026, Elon Musk's rocket launch company, SpaceX, merged with his artificial intelligence company, xAI, with the goal of launching AI data centers into space. But researchers are skeptical.
Data centers require a lot of cooling. That's actually really hard to do in space.
Samantha Lawler is an astronomer who studies space junk.
Seems like, oh, space is cold, infinite heat sink capacity, but it's actually really hard to get the heat to leave, right? When the sun is shining, all that heat builds up.
Objects in space exposed to direct sunlight can get as hot as 120 degrees Celsius. And because there's no air, that heat can't easily go anywhere. Lawler also points out that despite its name, space is getting crowded, with around 11,000 satellites already in low Earth orbit.
We do need to think more carefully about prioritizing which satellites are most beneficial to the most people. There are satellites that are useful for saving human lives, for planning crop rotations, for watching climate change unfold and helping us to mitigate that.
Some of these new cooling technologies are more feasible than others, but they all have the same goal, making AI use less water and energy. But that might not be enough. It can also make sense to reduce the need for cooling in the first place. Something as simple as shifting workloads to cooler hours or water-secure regions can significantly reduce environmental impact. There's also a school of thought in AI called small data, big tasks. This approach relies on changing the way we train AI models altogether by teaching it in small, deliberate steps, rather than brute force programming them with millions of possible scenarios. This reduces the massive computations that keep data centers running hot and thirsty around the clock. And then we, the users of AI, can also play our part. You can opt for less water-intensive LLMs or select which model they use when entering prompts. Another solution, of course, is choosing not to use a chatbot to draft every email or automate every moment of friction in our lives. Because behind every quick AI response is something very physical. Water, energy, and communities already stretched thin. What about you? How often do you use AI tools like Claude or ChatGPT? And are you concerned about how much water and energy they use? Let us know down in the comments and visit dw.com.
You use them every single second of every single day. So she's definitely speaking to me. Yeah, we're gonna go start all this thing. What's this? Explosive corruption, power in the internet. Okay. You are who I need next. Power in the internet. Okay. So well, me get a video start out. No, this can't be you. Native tongue. Anyway, I'll be going to Trinidad next since I can't get to that. But I'm gonna just give you the first page, some highlights from the IMF report. They were in St. Kitts and Nevis, I think, in February. Economic growth slowed in 2025, but is expected to rebound to 2% in 2026 and strengthen over the medium term. The projected pickup this year is supported by construction, agriculture, renewable energy projects, and the continued expansion of tourism activities. Although elevated oil prices associated with the war in the Middle East would weigh in on the economy through their impact on tourism and transportation sectors. So we're still waiting and seeing. We've been talking about this Iran situation. If this persists, I could tell you for 6 more months, we are in devastating trouble. There is no way in the world which will not be touched. Devastating trouble. Anyway, inflation is expected to rise moderately to 2.2% in 2026, driven by higher global energy and food prices, before stabilizing over the medium term. Current account deficit remains wide at 14.6% of GDP in 2025, well above the pre-pandemic average. It so and when you ain't got no current account money, you cash poor. This is and that's where the government has to borrow. So how much of a percent you over? That is also the percentage that you got to borrow. That's how the part they work. Uh, the banking system remains widely stable, although vulnerabilities persist. Geothermal and solar energy projects are advancing steadily. Not steady enough for some people, but we are told, they were told, that it is advancing steadily. Near term growth risks are tilted to the downside. Now, I had to use AI to find out what that means. When they say near term growth risks are tilted to the downside, that means the way how they explain it to me is symmetry. So, symmetry is when you have perfect balance, harmony, and asymmetry, which this is the circumstance here, means that it is more likely that growth is gonna go towards the downside in the near term, while inflation risks are tilted to the upside, which means that the 2.2% inflation that I mentioned earlier, it is more likely that is 3% or higher. Well, definitely higher than the 2.2%. So if you think about it from a weather perspective, if they say that today gonna be 70 degrees, but is more towards the downside, then they're saying that it's more likely that it's gonna be 60 than 80. And if it's toward the upside, it's more likely to be 80 than 70. Heightened global policy uncertainty including related to CBI programs, geopolitical tensions, and volatility in commodity and financial markets could wane on CBI inflows and tourism and adversely affect banks' investment portfolios. So, which mean that the banks are looking, if you could recall, some years ago for the first time in history, St. Kitts and Nevis National Bank say they lose money. So they are also, reasonably on edge at this moment in time. Um, Persistently high oil prices could weigh further on growth and exacerbate inflationary pressures. Domestically, financial sector weaknesses and exposure to natural disaster could pose fiscal risks. On the upside, and the upside is basically one little sentence here at the end. A successful energy transition could strengthen medium term growth. And we have been speaking about energy transition. We did videos on geothermal, desalination. I think I did one on solar as well. If not, we will get to that. There's some amazing stuff going on there. We might also have to do one on battery technologies. But that is the first part. We're going on to the second one. We're going Trinidad. They had some confusion in Trinidad. I'm trying to get some spice with the videos. And then we're going to get to the economics.
I wish to state to this House that none of my family members have received any government contracts, none. However, under the PNM, the wives of PNM ministers were in receipt of multi-million-dollar contracts. Members, relatives who now aspire to be Prime Minister receive CPEP contracts. Minister, can you indicate out of the multi-million-dollar contracts that have been awarded by landmark corruption, meaning landmark TT, how many of those contracts have been subject to open public tender? I want to answer the member by saying, over the last 10 years, none of the contracts awarded by the HEC was done through open tendering.
The Trinidad and Tobago Parliament was bubbling over with drama today as the government came with a statement that was more like a clapback to defend itself against corruption allegations. Now, for weeks, the media and the general public have had this rumor that a new affordable housing project that the government is pursuing is littered with corruption. Now, the allegations are that the government has been corrupting the procurement process to ensure that their cronies and their political affiliates secure the contract for this affordable housing project. Now, when it comes to Trinidad and Tobago, these are serious allegations because, as you know, the opposition and the government are constantly accusing each other of corruption, nepotism, and...
Let me read this now. There are several water sources in our mountains and over on the south side. With having access to the wave technology needed to generate energy from the natural wave actions on that side. Well, I'm just telling you that these water sources, just think about St. Kitts and Nevis. And don't think about St. Kitts and Nevis as it is. If we get through with some of these technologies, we are gonna be in a position where it gonna be prosperous. It gonna be like a Guyana right now. Guyana had less than 1 million people before they get oil. I promise you that in the years to come, Guyana gonna tens of millions of people living in Guyana. As a result, it don't got Guyanese, Transingis and Nevis who going back home. So if you think about we getting through with this, you go think about the St. Kitts and Nevis closer to a population of 100,000 plus, with all of them people there active. So the water sources, I don't see how it would suffice. But we're in Trinidad now. And you see how they got confusion over the procurement process. When we talk about the opening, when I tell you about the paradigm shift, one of the paradigm shifts could be a more open procurement process. Speak to you about how it is digitized in places that were corrupt and they ended that, so that all of the government procurements are available online. Everybody could see not only what the project is, but what the bids are. So this would bring ultimate transparency. It would actually bring security to persons from outside who want to bid. I don't see how we could lose by um, making it more open. But see, they got problem in Trinidad over the procurement process.
Cronyism. So today in the House of Representatives, Housing Minister Saddam Hussein defended the government. He made it clear that no contracts are being given to the U.S.
Saddam Hussein is a crazy name right now. I'm actually listening to this thing about the Iraq War. This is crazy.
Friends and cronies. And then he did something that I found quite interesting. He basically outlined a litany of corrupt allegations or corrupt contracts that were awarded under the PNM. And I was like, my gosh. Of course, allegations of corruptions are nothing new in Caribbean politics. And that's the aim of this channel, to show all of us how different and how similar our political systems are. Now, I'm going to allow you to listen to the section of the housing minister's speech where he outlined a litany of corrupt contracts that were allegedly offered when the PNM government was in power. And I want my Trinidad and Tobago audience to weigh in and let us know if these allegations are actually true. Take a listen.
That equal attention and rigor be given to projects and contracts awarded under the previous administration, such as the $1 billion acquisition of pharmaceuticals by NIPDEC, the $100 million secondary roads rehabilitation and improvement company, and the RDC racket, where there were serious problems of bid rigging, corruption, and collusion. In October 2019, the PNM appointed HDC awarded a contract for the construction of approximately 110 townhouses in Terrestrial in the sum of $72 million, which was based on a sole select basis. Sole select, hand-picked contract to build houses at Terrestrial for $72 million. Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform you that the contract was awarded to Ricky Ragunanan Construction Limited. What is extremely alarming is that the board agreed to the award in principle. I don't understand, Mr. Speaker, what in principle means. The entire housing project has collapsed under corruption. Mr. Speaker, after the construction of the units at Terrestrial, CEP found multiple flaws and glaring infrastructural issues with the townhouses. The technical report found that there was no steel in the decking and other parts of the units. Further, the ring beam of the units, which is used to secure the roof, did not have steel to tie the roof to the unit. As such, not a single unit could have been occupied. A recommendation was given to either repair it or demolish it. Ricky Ragunanan is known famously in the tent business and not the construction business. So the former administration hired a tent man to build HEC houses by sole select, no competition.
No, that's lyrics. That's lyrics. The man said, that man hire a tent man who build houses. Jesus. This is what that man are going with in Trinidad. And a separate level. This circumstance here, my take on corruption is always, listen, I don't want you to tell me that they do this and they do that and all them kind of story there. I understand. Let we take this thing to the DPP and let we get this thing going for real, for real. Let's have a real discussion. Let's have investigations. And this is what I mean by, in my perspective, people are losing faith in the institutions. So who are the leaders who are going to come forward and strengthen institutions and put people in positions to not on paper do their job, I have a title, but actually be in a position supported by all of the equipment and stuff that they need to really do their job. But as we could see in Trinidad, they make millions. But at the same thing, what is happening? All over. As the lady said.
Many of those homes that were built 90%, I'm told, were constructed in PNM-held constituencies, and they focus on two particular constituencies, those of Maruga Tableland and San Fernando West, and I'm happy to report those seats came home to United National Congress. But, Mr. Speaker, I wish to state to this House that none of my family members have received any government contracts, none. However, under the PNM, the wives of PNM ministers were in receipt of multi-million-dollar contracts to pressure wash the Brian Lara Stadium. A former Minister of Health wife was a principal involved in a company called Unicom, which received contracts in the vicinity of millions of dollars involved in the refurbishment of this very Red House.
No, he mentioned the fact that wives of politicians are in receipt of lucrative government contracts. Now, while we do not specifically have that same circumstance, we damn close. We mighty close.
And the President's House. Members, relatives who now aspire to be Prime Minister receive CPEP contracts. There's one member in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, who received a CPEP contract, several CPEP contracts, and a HDC house. Others were running canteen at MTS Plaza in Arangwes. A sister of one of them by the name of Gatsby, who served as a reforestation assistant in the reforestation program, had to be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into withholding government records. Another silk on that side, Mr. Speaker, received multi-million-dollar briefs from the AG office, TNTech, and Plibdeco, and that is to name a few. To date, those state enterprises cannot determine the work that that person has done for those fees. Another had to recuse themselves over 60 times from cabinet, mainly due to his brother providing financial services to the government with loans in the sum of billions of dollars, one Angus Young. One Richard Young serves as the chairman of the Economic Development Board and the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center. They had no problem with Bridget Anisette George's husband, Newman George, being appointed to multiple state enterprises such as the HDC, Paria Fuel Trading, Guaracara Refining, Heritage, and the TPHL. The personal friend and lawyer of the former Prime Minister, Keith Rowley, placed his personal lawyer, Mr. Michael Kwamina SC, on Petrotrin, Paria, Guaracara, Heritage, TPHL, Caribbean Airlines, and earned almost $15 million in state briefs. Keith Rowley's sister-in-law was appointed as the general manager of Chaguaramas Development Authority and was also allocated a housing unit in Victoria Keys. There are many other instances, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, based on all of this, one must seriously question the motives of the opposition. Over the last 10 years, they have failed the people of this country with their housing program, and now they are attempting to frustrate citizens from owning homes, preventing people from accessing jobs, and hindering local businesses such as hardwares from earning a revenue.
Speaker, it's a question to the Minister. Minister, can you indicate, out of the multi-million-dollar contracts that have been awarded by landmark corruption, meaning landmark TT, how many of those contracts have been subject to open public tender?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to answer the member by saying, over the last 10 years, none of the contracts awarded by the HEC was done through open tendering. Yeah. I wish to state to this House that none of my family members have received any government contracts, none.
Did I pause it? Did I press play? Yeah, and see that come back in. The open tendering is necessary. If you're going to be telling me about good governance, then that is something that is fundamental to the good governance. Government want to put out a contract. The best way to get the most for your money is if there is a tendering process. And the best way for there to be transparency is if all are because open tendering. Nope. No, we come back in at the IMF now. We're gonna talk about the board assessment. So these are the things that they're telling the government that they need to do. Continued fiscal consolidation. supported by a strong fiscal resilience framework, is critical to stabilize debt. That basically means you got to consolidate your debts. You got to you basically got to get perspective of your finances, and you got to see which part you go trim the fat. Uh, we build buffers and reduce vulnerability to shocks. On a moderately front-loaded consolidation scenario, this means that you take a moderate approach at first, combining expenditure rationalization, getting control of the money that you're spending, your expenditure, and revenue mobilization. I mean, getting more money. Public debt would stabilize at the regional benchmark by 2031, and higher government deposits could help rebuild buffers. If you got to rebuild buffers, then you must understand at this particular moment in time the buffers them off. If I remember when you used to go Caribbean Cove and we go up on the in the water and he had the thing and you go bounce up on people, you get on bones. If you hit for real. Current expenditures requires further rationalization. And I mentioned the cash poor nature. The current expenditure was like 15%, which is way out of whack in comparison to what Team Unity was doing, including streamlining goods and services spending. Policy measures to mitigate the impact of higher oil prices should be well targeted and time bound, which means that Dr. Joe would have to put some thinking. This would require people who understand intimately where the market is and the possibilities, people who basically they're into energy, so that you could be able to time properly any concessions, and they need to be thought through. Tax revenue has ample scope to increase through rolling back COVID era concessions, which mean that all of the nice things, this is why you would hear announcements from the government saying that they don't need to do that anymore. They did it through COVID time and now it's basically good. They are telling them pull back all of that. Broadening VAT, broadening the VAT base. They want to put VAT on more items than VAT has been on. So, I mean, it's just exactly as its own. They want to put VAT, whatever things where you used to buy and you say, well, that VAT free, they want to take off the free half of that. Strengthening property tax. We've been hearing about how they're revaluing property and they want to charge you more. Increasing excises, particularly on tobacco products and alcohol products. They just want to charge more duties, more taxes on those items. They're saying that they are too low. So look out. The tourism, when you're hearing about like right now a Guinness for $10, they want it to be closer to 15, essentially. Formally adopting fiscal rules anchored by the regional debt benchmark is essential to underpin fiscal consolidation efforts. I did a show earlier this year where we spoke about the need not just to say that you are going to run the country in a responsible manner, but to have laws that indicate quarterly reports. I would suggest changing how we do our accounting so that you could do actually monthly statements. I would adjust when there is an election coming up, you got to provide an in-depth account for the status of the country. This would allow us to know month by month where you stand. You could plan and do more and be more fiscally responsible. And they are basically saying the same thing that we have been saying, that these things do not just need to be policies, but need to be instituted as laws. And to say that when you debt reach a particular figure, you will take particular measures to control the debt. They're basically talking about austerity. I'm not going so far with it, but I do recognize the need to change certain things before things get out of control. Uh, this would help the authorities' ongoing efforts to reduce reliance on CPI revenues, mitigate fiscal procli- procycli- procyclicality, procyclic, procyclicality. Wow, I gotta find out what that means. Anyway, strengthen policy credibility. The planned sovereign wealth resilience fund is also welcome. Its implementation in line with the IMF TA would help manage CBI revenue volatility, enhance disaster resilience, and support long-term fiscal sustainability. Parametric reforms to the Social Security Fund should proceed without delay to prevent the reserve depletion by 2040, which essentially means, as I've been warning people, as I've been telling people, Social Security, it is not going well. 2040 is the best guess estimate. This is if things go well for the reserve funds to run out of Social Security. After that, they're not gonna be able to basically deal with. We're talking about pensioners, we're talking about sick leave and all these type of things. It's not gonna be happening. So there has to be major reform, and they say without delay, in order to prevent such an occurrence. The banking system remains broadly stable, although vulnerabilities persist. Capital positions have strengthened, and non-performing loan ratios have continued to decline. So the banks have more capital and less non-performing loans, while credit growth has remained robust. So they're lending out money. Financial sector policy should focus on resolving legacy non-performing loans. These are the people who owe a lot of money for a long time. I think them people over what Christopher, but something like somewhere on the peninsula, I think it's them kind of people there. Strengthening provisioning and further de-risking investment portfolios. Comprehensive reform of the development bank is critical to safeguard financial and fiscal stability. And in this particular sentence, I feel like is where the opposition miss. Because I am 96% certain that I heard Dr. Joe saying that things are good again done at Development Bank. And this report is from this year, came out in April. And they are saying that reform has to happen comprehensive. That means from top to bottom. And I spoke about some of the things that need to happen there as well. The FSRC, which is the Financial Security, finance, the people who govern companies and so on, oversight framework on the non-banking sector should be further strengthened. And in my opinion, what they're speaking about, they're speaking to TDC. I think you would see TDC does do a thing where they would say, Christmas will come and they would be like, borrow some money to go on a vacation. They want to have more say in them kind of things. credit unions, cooperatives, all of these who do not necessarily fit under the banking laws, then they would like more strengthening of those laws to ensure that the financial situation is stable. Last is structural reforms are essential to raise medium-term growth potential. Priorities include accelerating renewable energy projects. So they must try say, let we go with the geothermal and the solar. Enhancing the investment climate. So making it easier for people to move money in and out of the country. Addressing labor market skills mismatches. And continued efforts to improve data adequacy. So, need more data, need more access. Again, from Trinidad, this next video you're kind of interesting. Yeah, I add this later, but for me, it's an interesting perspective. This next video is about wait, let me see. This just look kind of make a different thing. Let me see. I know what I'm thinking about, but let me see.
More than patois. Not even 48 hours after the Hill and Gully debate, there's another discourse about culture. This time, arguments about the Jamaican dialect being accepted, especially in Parliament. It follows an exchange in the House of Representatives on Wednesday. Romardo Lyons reports.
Okay, so this is what I thought it would be. So, this is about whether you could go in Parliament and just start there, like, just talk to the people. Is it acceptable? What's your perspective? Is it acceptable to you to use, as I say, patois or dialect, whatever? We'll just start in Parliament.
Bless up, bless up. You know where we can find some real Jamaican food for them?
Food for thought. Is the appreciation for Jamaican dialect greater outside the country? People will have different responses, but this occurrence in the House of Representatives Wednesday has reignited a debate around the language in Jamaica.
Madam Speaker, me get up this afternoon to make my first sectoral speech for my portfolio.
Hold on. Standing orders. And I think you are fully aware. And if I have to stop you again during your presentation, you will not get any additional time. No, and she knows.
Shortly after, another member uttered these words.
Broken English. It's broken.
Summed up with the same presiding principle referenced ever so often for students who challenge school grooming policy.
She is about standing orders, but I don't know you gonna standing order what say you go talk English. I don't understand. I don't read the Jamaican thing or see how the vibes be.
Is with your uniform or hair. That is, rules are rules. The standing orders of the House of Representatives of Jamaica governs what is allowed in Parliament. Standing Order 6, titled Language, says the proceedings and debates of the House shall be in the English language.
Our parliamentarians are the ones who have crafted the rules now governing its affairs. And so insofar as those rules remain the same, they ought to be followed. However, Parliament reflects the will of the people. And so if it is that the values emanating from these rules no longer reflect the values of today's Jamaica, then the rules ought to be amended.
The issue has reached the diaspora. Erwin Clare, Managing Director of the New York-based Caribbean Immigrant Services, questions why archaic rules continue to be observed.
Meanwhile, Harvard and Princeton and all them people can't wait to start teaching and asking us about our patois, and we look down on it because of some archaic rules and laws that Parliament can easily, the members can easily go in and say, tell you, them thing there, we can trash that. What is it to stop us from doing that in Parliament, by the way? What?
Back home, cultural activist Dr. Sandra Stanley Nair cited the weight of the standing order.
There is no one that can dispute the fact that standing orders and the regulations around behavior in the House of Representatives in our parliament must stand.
However,
one thing to know about Jamaica is that Jamaica treat them dialect like it's a separate language for real. And I kind of consider it that we should do the same. But still at the same time, I ain't for this in town though. She's supposed to be able to talk if she wanna talk. People vote for she.
She says this occurrence has provided an opportunity to consider whether Jamaica is serious about reparatory justice.
In the context of the parliament, one would expect that there would be discretion that is allowable, even in the context of standing orders. So much so that we have seen examples of when Spanish was used. We have seen examples of presidents that have come to Jamaica on official visits, and they have in fact embraced our language enough to greet us in our own language. I think there is something fundamental about using occasions such as these as not just teachable moments, but actionable moments to be able to take our citizens and our country into paths, more importantly, paths toward real sovereignty.
She says leaders should have a greater responsibility.
Our leaders should be educating themselves on this. In fact, the Jamaican language policy, which we have been waiting for, has not been given any kind of regard by our leaders.
Romarda Lyons, TVJ News.
The standing orders for SKN is the same. No, sir, you are not allowed to speak dialect. I would understand if they are the same, but the question I am asking is, what you feel about that? Should should a man be able to go into parliament and just start the things? Say by me went over by them man and them man let me know. Are we disgracing ourselves by speaking in the way that we talk to one another on a regular basis in our parliament? So when Rastafari burn out the system over the years, it's these kinds of mental slavery we still uphold via our own people who now hold the seats of the farmer plantocracy. I feed you. Rastaman nothing's on. You can accuse Rastaman and say Rastaman do nothing at all, boy. What is the next? Huh? Okay. This might be for the fighting, but anyway, give a little bit. This now is into the full report. When they're speaking about financial soundness, they say the banks have strengthened their capital positions and continue to reduce non-performing loan ratios. The systemic bank has continued to de-risk by cutting equity investments and modestly reallocating its portfolio towards loan and debt instruments. Nevertheless, vulnerabilities remain elevated, reflecting large and systematic non performing loans, weaknesses in provisioning quality, and still sizable and relatively risky investment portfolios. The development bank continues to pose contingent liabilities. So, if you're working in the banking system, you got a lot of work on your hands right now. Should, if it is our own court, but you have to understand that His Majesty's Court King is them our leaders play allegiance to. I Listen, I understand all of that, but what me not understand is this, right? You not got to believe me, in a sense, but it's the same thing. We had an activist, we had an attorney there, and they tell you that it reflect the will of the people. When he tell you about the will of the people, he never not tell nobody about nobody from England to know. It is the people of Jamaica who could decide. It is the parliamentarians who could decide. So we can give them the cap out and say that that is what they pledge allegiance to. That's how come we are dealing with the thing right now. Some may say, do you think that it would be some kind of embarrassment if we have a leader who is in parliament speaking this way? And don't get me wrong, it would be difficult if this person gonna represent us internationally. But even in that manner, well, we could get an interpreter. We could get an interpreter for these things. I always wonder why people from the Caribbean who come to America don't speak dialect and then say, okay, my interpreter gonna tell I why be me I say no. You give somebody a job, no? That's how I look at the situation. Let's see. No. I'll be gonna dip back in Jamaica yeah, again.
Me get up this afternoon to make my first sectoral speech. Call me
Oh,
portfolio.
hold on. Standing orders. And I think you are fully aware. And if I have to stop you again during your presentation, you will not get any additional time.
Yes, you heard right. A Jamaican MP was stopped from delivering sections of her debate in the Jamaican dialect, a language which has brought much fame to Jamaica, which some universities teach and which many around the world want to learn. Now, the moment happened when opposition spokesperson on culture, Nikisha Burchell, rose to make her presentation in the sectorial debate. She opened her debate with a sentence.
When I was in Jamaica, just to show you how serious Jamaica take the Jamaican dialect, they got books that translate what they would say in Jamaica and let you know what it mean in English. So they gone as far as to say they basically have translated their language. So that's how come they're saying about how people want to learn Jamaican patois in universities. Imagine that.
In Jamaican dialect, which translates to, I'm about to make my first sectoral presentation as a member of parliament, but she was immediately stopped by none other than House Speaker Juliet Holness. And guys, I am recording this one with a heavy heart. I mean, the moment was met with a little laughter and lighthearted debate between both sides of the House, but this is a really serious issue because I am sure that the member of parliament was not going to do her entire presentation in the Jamaican language, but surely she should be allowed to present in the language of her people, which, as she said, most Jamaicans understand. Now, I know that Speaker Juliet Holness is a stickler for the standing orders, and her response to this would be that this is the current rule, and until it is changed, we have to abide by it. But how soon can we change this? Because I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with our MPs not being able to speak our language, a language that we are proud of, that has been passed down to us from our ancestors who used it to remember their homeland, but also to plan and plot their freedom from slavery and oppression. Now, I realize that MP Nikisha Burchell is somewhat of a disruptor. I think she used the dialect at the beginning of her presentation to bring attention to the fact that the Jamaican language is still not given the respect that it deserves. Now, I'm going to allow you to listen to the moment in the Jamaican Parliament today and give me your thoughts below. Should our leaders who represent us at the highest level be allowed to use the dialect on national platforms, in formal spaces like the parliament? Take a listen.
Madam Speaker, me get up this afternoon to make my first sectoral speech. Call me portfolio.
Hold on. Standing orders. And I think you are fully aware. And if I have to stop you again during your presentation, you will not get any additional time. No, and she knows. Standing Order 6, page 3.
Standing order of the SK National Assembly states that debate proceedings of it shall be in English. Listen, you keep on and tell me things for me I already know. No, I have not disputed any of those facts with you, though. Let me take it from a different position. You always hear politicians boast off and say, we were the first to do this. We were the first to do that. I'm asking, shouldn't this be one of the precedents maybe that we could set? I'm not asking what the society is currently, we're looking in at the crystal ball and we look at where we at. We're looking at where we want to head. One of the things that make us who we are is how we communicate with one another. In a SK is Niwis. When you talk to somebody from Nevis, you hear the V. It's just a slight difference in the thing, but you know who you're dealing with at any given moment in time. Some people say Abi, some say we. You know what I'm saying? But in the communication, we don't know what's going on overall. Otherwise, we ain't gonna be communicating. The whole purpose of us opening our mouth is to understand what the other one is saying. You still not deal with what me ask as far as would it bring some type of shame? Me not concerned about what the Queen say, I have seen British Parliament, British Parliament is not anything that you need to try to aspire to. For all the gentlemen and ladies and so way be them say them be. Me and talk about things and news and how we want the thing to look. No, my brother, it is not necessarily for you. I'm presenting the facts to the benefit of the viewers and engage. Okay, I got you. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I always said this. The purpose of why we look at these different videos is all of us have inherited the Westminster system in some shape or form. And so the purpose of looking at these is to then kind of draw it back and look at where we are. Sometimes we learn things about ourselves in the observation of our neighbors. You don't necessarily have to go through the pain to learn, Sometimes you go watch somebody else pain and walk out. Nope. I'm not interested in going through that at all.
Madam Speaker, here I.
But yeah, I appreciate you letting the public know that those are the standing orders of St. Kitts and Nevis. You apparently you have to speak English. I'm just saying, if Sean get up one the time and say, all right, then boy, over there from Nevis and so, are we gonna look at that as an affront? I want to see that in the Hansard. Make Hansard. What we need to do is we need to give Hansard some extra work. Let them go try spell chook. Cause me ask people who hear how to spell chook. Everybody know what I mean if me tell you something chook me. But nobody go spell chook for me as yet.
Allow me to speak. A leader. Madam Speaker, perhaps I should abandon that attempt to use our local language because I have been reminded of the linguistic conventions of this Honorable House. Because maybe there is no more fitting way to begin a presentation on culture than to speak briefly in the language understood by the overwhelming majority of Jamaican people. Even if that language still struggles for full acceptance in some of our most formal national spaces, including this very parliament. So let me give you the Queen's English. Let me give you the Queen's English. At the outset, permit me first to thank the Leader of the Opposition, the Most Honourable Mark Golding, for the confidence he has placed in me through this portfolio assignment. I also thank my parliamentary colleagues, my councillors, my constituency and personal team, and the many people who support the demanding work of representation and public service every single day. Life is never carried by one person alone, and I especially want to thank my parents, Miss Faye and Pastor Burchell, for instilling in me from very early a deep love for Jamaica, a deep respect for people, right, Roy, and a deep pride in our culture, particularly through faith, religion, community, and service. Much of what I understand today about identity, resilience, storytelling, and the spirit of Jamaican people began long before politics. It began in church. It began in my community. It began in school. It began in my yard. And permit me especially to acknowledge the people of South St. James who traveled all the way from country to town to sit in this chamber today to hear their MP deliver her maiden sectoral presentation. From Anchovy to Catadupa, from Maroon Town to Welcome Hall, from Springfield to Mount Carey. Thank you for making the journey. Thank you for believing in me. Madam Speaker, me get up this afternoon to make my first sectoral speech.
Hold on. Standing orders. And I think you are fully aware. And if I have to stop you again...
I'll come back to the development bank. This is number 23 of the IMF report. Comprehensive reform of the development bank is essential to safeguard financial and fiscal stability. The bank is heavily undercapitalized and with high non-performing loans ratio, persistent losses, and significant reliance on public sector funding, particularly from Social Security Fund, posing a growing contingent liability to the government. Liquidity is tight, but has been maintained largely by curtailing new lending. To stabilize the bank, the authorities have implemented several measures, including by restructuring non performing loans, increasing provisioning, and strengthening underwriting standards. Nevertheless, the bank's long term viability should be carefully assessed in light of current pressures on the fiscal position and the public sector balance sheet. To further strengthen the institution, deeper reforms need to be implemented to restore its solvency, including a credible recapitalization plan and the decisive non performing loan resolution with full provisioning for impaired assets alongside transparent communication of the resulting recapitalization needs and associated fiscal risks to the public. Transparent communication and the state of the development bank. I feel like this is one of the things where I are supposed to be a pin Dr. Jewett, because he said Tim Gihey and the bank was in trouble. But he has stabilized it. He has come in with the plans. But when you are looking at what is going on here with the report, and the fact that the report also goes on to say the authorities generally agree with our assessments, how the hell he's gonna come and tell people now that all is well? Can't be factual. But I feel like a poor job has been done. I actually heard that somebody was on the radio speaking about it this afternoon. I don't know. I wasn't told what the program was, but the report is a great way to get third party information on what is going on in the country. Sometimes information that I guess you are not supposed to have. I was speaking about how they want more power. They say oversight of credit unions should be strengthened. Credit union growth has remained strong in recent periods, while the non-performing loan ratio remains elevated. Prudential requirements, including lending standards, provisioning rules, and supervisory actions, should be tightened to reduce regulatory arbitrage between banks and credit unions. This means arbitrage is like a funny kind of term, finance term, where they're moving money. How must I put this? I'm gonna have to find a way to describe arbitrage. It's something what me myself recently kind of coming to grips with, but is it's kind of like they're manipulating the situation to make the maximum amount of money and to hide losses in a certain circumstance. And this is why I said that they want more control. The measure should be supported by the adoption of minimum standards at the regional level, in addition to reinforcing the FSRC supervisory framework. Also requires legal amendments to enhance data reporting obligations, limit dividend distributions, and broaden enforcement powers alongside a more risk-based supervisory approach. So they need to get in there on all of those entities. I think we got one more video. So we're going to get in and out of that. This should be the one. Yeah, so we start with data centers and we're going to end with a data center.
We're experiencing one of the fastest building booms the world has ever seen, described as a global construction frenzy that shows no signs of slowing. Humanity is now dependent on large-scale data centers, and that demand is only increasing. But the strain this infrastructure is placing on our power and water sources is enormous, and people are starting to notice.
Many neighboring homeowners say, not in my backyard.
That opposition is forcing some tech giants to rethink where they should build.
The data center industry is actually going to be responsible for 3-4% of global electricity consumption, so that's a huge sector.
And now, with AI taking our reliance to a whole new level, this rapidly growing area of industry is under pressure to clean up its act, and fast. But with these buildings now consuming as much energy as entire countries, what can we actually do about it? This is what a typical data center looks like in 2026. And if you live in or close to a major city, there's a good chance you'll have one nearby. Because there are now more than 11,000 of these worldwide across 174 countries. And unsurprisingly, over a third of them are in the USA. Some of the largest clusters are in places you might expect, like Texas and California. But the state with the most is actually Virginia. The UK and Germany are way behind in second and third, and the rest are pretty well spread around the globe, because if they weren't absolutely everywhere, we wouldn't be able to do all those things that have become an essential part of our modern lives. We don't just mean the important stuff, like online shopping, banking, or watching epic construction videos on YouTube. Without data centers, there'd be no doom scrolling, no long video calls that really could have been an email, or memes that just refuse to die. And we'd all miss that, wouldn't we? But data centers weren't always omnipresent. To see how quickly these structures have been expanding, it's best to look at it from a different perspective. After all, we can't do a video on data centers without digging into some, well, data. For starters, take a look at this graph. It shows the staggering growth in data centers globally over the past 20 years in terms of installed capacity. In other words, the total amount of power available for all the equipment needed to run them. Notice how things went stratospheric after about 2017. The overall figure now stands at more than 122 gigawatts. To give you an idea of just how much that really is, the total capacity of Hinkley Point C, the massive new nuclear power plant currently under construction in the UK, is around 3.2 gigawatts. That means you'd need 38 Hinkley Point C sized nuclear plants to power just the world's data centres, and they're continuing to soar in number and size.
What the hell is a gigawatt?
Before AI, we also had many data centers, but those data centers tend to be much smaller, like less than 100 megawatts. But today, a AI data center can easily be 500 megawatts or even more than 1 gigawatt. So the concentration of the...
Okay. At this time, we might get a pull-up stump. You hear and understand the man said that a small data center needs 100 megawatts of power. Okay? 100 megawatts of power. 100 megawatts of power is more power than Singis and Nevis use to combine in a day. And that's what that man gonna need. Ain't no shot.
This large power demand and other resource demand like water over a small area, that's a big challenge for the infrastructure.
By 2030, data centers are set to be consuming more electricity than the entirety of Japan. That's double what they were pulling from the grid in 2022. And as we've just heard, the main reason for this increase is the meteoric rise of AI. Every time you chuck something into ChatGPT, it kickstarts a process that uses more electricity and water than many of us realise. Just kidding. Other channels trying to imitate us might do that, but we certainly don't. Now, when ChatGPT alone is processing billions of prompts every day, it's no wonder the infrastructure that makes it all happen is having to scale up very fast.
AI systems were responsible for about 20% of total data center electricity consumption by the end of 2024. And that number could have increased to about half by the end of last year, 2025. Altogether, these numbers are just becoming really big, really fast.
But keeping up with the demand is where things get tricky. Data center construction isn't just about building a great big hall and filling it with servers, despite how it might appear in footage like this. There's actually a lot more to it than that, which is why the biggest facilities being built at the moment are considered mega projects. First of all, you've got to decide where to put them. Ideally, you want a place with good fibre connections, water sources, and for the really large ones that handle several hundred megawatts on their own, high-capacity power grids.
Those data centers, they consume as much power as entire cities, and you can't just put those anywhere. It's actually really hard to find power grids where there is sufficient capacity to even start building a project like that. So at that point, power capacity becomes the number one concern.
There would.
Okay. So here's the deal. We might really go to the whole of this thing, yeah. Because the first one was to kind of give you a taste of the data center, you know how it works, etc. This one is a more in-depth look, and this one here is more focusing on the power. So the first one was more the water consumption and how they cool the data center, but this one is more an explanation of the power needs. Unless until, and even if you think about the geothermal plant, they are trying to do a geothermal plant for 30 megawatts, which is sizable, good size. 30 megawatts ain't doing nothing. 30 megawatts is 30% of what the data center need, much less the population. So there's no shot. not realistically. Anybody selling you this dream, you're supposed to know that they're selling you a dream. We need to focus on things that are more possible than these data centers. This is not, in the current configuration, something to pursue in a realistic manner.
Have to be plenty of space too, not just enough to squeeze the building into. Many are constructed with expansion in mind, expansions that often follow not long after they're finished and with rapid speed. The companies behind them are called hyperscalers for a reason. Another thing to think about is climate and geography. Lower temperatures make it easier to keep everything cool, and it's generally better if you build these things away from places where there are likely to be extreme weather events or natural disasters. You see, just like with other big bits of infrastructure, if a data center goes down, it can cause serious problems. And I don't just mean missing out on the latest TikTok craze. We're talking about huge financial losses, service failures, reputational damage, all the kind of things that every company absolutely dreads. Alongside all those racks of equipment that have to be kept running 24/7, the cooling system is a key priority. Usually, this is done in one of two ways. There's the traditional method of circulating cold air into the server racks, normally through the floor with waste heat exiting out at the top. While it's effective, even if some of the air is recycled, it's a process that consumes massive amounts of electricity. Alternatively, you've got liquid cooling, which is becoming more common as we enter the AI era. This method involves using, yes, you guessed it, liquids like water or coolant to transfer the heat away, which requires less electricity and often less space. But the flip side is that all that water has to come from somewhere, and that can cause a pretty big dilemma.
This water is mostly coming from municipal water supply, and that can be stressful for a lot of public water systems, especially in the US. Most of the water systems are small or medium sized. They don't really have a lot of surplus capacity to supply to these large scale industry users.
So, what can be done to manage these crazy levels of consumption? Well, many companies are now prioritizing things like liquid cooling, investing in their own renewable sources, and even funding grid upgrades so they don't push up people's energy bills. Others are taking a more unusual approach, including with some techniques that are generating quite a bit of attention. Several of the world's biggest tech firms have partnered with nuclear providers. These deals would see data centers powered by reliable, low-carbon sources. Some are even restarting plants that had previously been closed, or are tapping into technology that still hasn't quite arrived yet, namely nuclear fusion and small modular reactors. Alternatively, you could do what companies in Europe are doing and build your data center underground inside an active mine or a former bunker, both of which are great for security and keeping everything cool. But these strategies aren't for everyone, especially companies needing to deliver high-performance data centers that are future-proof and super efficient right now. We're talking about both new builds and upgrades to existing ones. For many, investing in atomic energy or hollowing out a mountain isn't really a viable option. In fact, meeting the demands of this new AI-driven era at the speed required is such a challenge that it can be hard to know where to begin. That's where IES can help. IES is a global leader in physics-based building performance simulation and digital twin technology for all building types. With its whole facility approach, users can monitor.
Listen, I personally am intrigued by this video. Been learning more about these kind of things recently, especially the nuclear, but even the mention of the nuclear modulators. We've got no shot, man. So no way in the business of enriching uranium. Nah. I think we have seen enough. The point is, any politician who comes here to speak about data centers does not know anything. I wanted to equip you with enough information that you could push back and say, we ain't really gonna be able to do that. We can't generate the power, and the water is not gonna be enough. We just do not have the resources to do that within this, as I said, this current configuration of data centers and how the technology is at this particular moment in time. That might change in the future, but for now, that's just a dream. The last video actually, we going Georgetown, we going Guyana. We'll see what Guyana.
How can Venezuela's council in 2026 complain that Venezuela was coerced, structurally or otherwise, in the face of this declaration by Venezuela's president in 1897 that Venezuela freely signed the treaty in the absence of any coercion?
Within the week of May 4 to May 8, 2026.
That is not my understanding of what happened with the Venezuela situation. I listened endless things to find out what took place with that situation. Okay, no, let me take it back. I'm not saying that he was not coerced, but some information came to light after the voting and the debating concerning how the boundary will be determined. And Venezuela has basically protested the boundary ever since. This is regards to we're dealing with Essequibo region, the Guyana oil.
Guyana spent time showing the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, why Venezuela's claim to Essequibo cannot survive the evidence Guyana has to disprove that claim. An oil-rich territory located in Guyana to the east of Venezuela. Essequibo has been under Guyana's control since 1899. At that time, it was British Guiana. Great Britain acquired the territory following an arbitration in 1899. Venezuela is contesting the arbitration award which gave Essequibo to Britain. At the International Court of Justice on Friday, May 8, 2026, Guyana delivered a strong, detailed, and final response to Venezuela's claim that the Essequibo region belongs to Venezuela. Guyana argued that Venezuela's position that the 1899 arbitral award is invalid because of alleged fraud is not supported by reliable evidence and does not meet the standard required in international law. Venezuela's case is based on its claim that the 1899 arbitral award, which gave the territory to Great Britain, was affected by corruption and secret deals. To support this, Venezuela relies heavily on allegations linked to the Malé-Prévost Memorandum, a document published after the author's death that suggests there may have been wrongdoing during the arbitration process. Guyana told the court that that's a weak claim. The legal team representing the South American country said the document is not verified and does not carry strong legal weight. Guyana also argued that Venezuela has not provided clear, direct, or timely evidence to prove that fraud actually took place. Venezuela also argued that the 1897 Treaty of Washington, which created the arbitration process, was invalid. Based on this, Venezuela claims that the 1899 award, which came from the 1899 process, which is linked to the 1897 Treaty of Washington, should also be considered invalid. Guyana strongly rejected this argument, saying it is not supported by strong evidence. Guyana's lead attorney to the ICJ, Paul Reichler, stated that Venezuela has not shown proof that the treaty was illegitimate or that it affects the validity of the arbitration decision.
As you know, the myth of invalidity of the treaty was spawned in 1962, some 65 years after the fact. At the time, Venezuela first began to denounce the 1899 arbitral award. But this is not the reality that Venezuela recognized in 1897. It is directly opposite and in tension with the contemporaneous position of the Venezuelan government, including its president.
Venezuela further argued that the 1966 Geneva Agreement with Great Britain is the main legal document governing the dispute, and that it gives Venezuela a path to address what it sees as a historical injustice from 1899. In response, Guyana says the Geneva Agreement does not cancel the 1899 award. Instead, it provides a way for the dispute to be discussed and resolved. Guyana argued that Venezuela is interpreting the agreement in a way that goes against its original purpose. During closing arguments, Guyana's lawyer Paul Reichler said Venezuela's claims rely more on statements than on solid evidence. He argued that Venezuela failed to present strong, credible, or timely proof to support its case or to challenge Guyana's detailed evidence. The Corporative Republic of Guyana also told the court that the historical record supports its position. It said Venezuela accepted the 1899 award for more than 60 years, as shown by official maps, public statements, and government actions. Let's hear more from Attorney Reichler.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Richard Olney, liaised closely and frequently with Venezuela's two representatives during the negotiations, received them at his home, consulted with them, shared drafts with them, welcomed their proposals, adopted and made them his own, and persuaded his British counterpart, Lord Pontefract, to accept them, including those that Venezuela regarded as the most critical. The Venezuelan representatives expressed their full satisfaction with the draft agreement that Secretary Olney negotiated, and they recommended that the Venezuelan government accept it. Venezuela then accepted the agreement freely and without compulsion as serving its best interest. This is fully documented and uncontested. Here again, you will recall the words of President Crespo affirming that Venezuela accepted the agreement free of coercion. Quote, "The settlement plan was presented to Venezuela for its consideration with no coercive intent and in full respect of the sovereignty and independence of the Republic." And he again expressed his profound gratitude to the United States for helping Venezuela accomplish its objectives.
You know, what he's saying there is factual. All I'm saying is that this information, as Venezuela is saying, arose afterwards. And whoever was on the team hearing the award, because this was highly contested, they went in some kind of back room and they came back with a deal. And at that point in time there, Guyana was like, nah, ain't gonna be able to do it.
How can Venezuela's counsel in 2026 complain that Venezuela was coerced, structurally or otherwise, in the face of this declaration by Venezuela's president in 1897 that Venezuela freely signed the treaty in the absence of any coercion?
Guyana argued that Venezuela only formally challenged the award decades later, and that this late objection does not have a strong legal or factual basis. In fact, Attorney Reichler says Venezuela's claim is grounded in mythology, that all of it is a myth. He proceeded to ask the court to confirm that the 1899 arbitral award is valid, and most importantly, that the Essequibo region belongs to Guyana. On the first day of hearings, Monday, May 4, 2026, Guyana's legal team presented a clear timeline of events from 1899 to 1962, when Venezuela first formally challenged the award. Professor Nilufa Ural told the court that Venezuela's own actions during those 62 years showed that it accepted the decision. Professor Ural explained that Guyana presented strong evidence showing that during that time that spanned 6 decades, Venezuela consistently recognized the boundary between itself and Guyana. She also said Venezuela did not successfully challenge the evidence and only changed its position in 1962 when it began to claim the arbitration process had been correct. And again, that was after an alleged memorandum written by Malé Provost was published claiming there were backdoor deals happening during the process, which later turned out in favor of Great Britain.
While Venezuela's reaction to the 1899 award included some disappointment at not receiving a greater share of the disputed territory, this does not equate to challenging the award as being invalid or void. Venezuela never challenged the legality or the validity of the 1899 arbitral award for the next 62 years. Venezuela's failure to challenge the legality of the award for 62 years is especially prejudicial to its current claim that the award is invalid. Each and every one of the challenges to the award Venezuela now makes in these proceedings were available to it since October 1899. Yet, during the next 6 decades, Venezuela did not make any of these claims. Let's take them one at a time, as they appear in Venezuela's rejoinder. The first reason invoked for the award's alleged invalidity is, quote, that it was rendered on the basis of an invalid treaty. Mr. Reichler showed you this morning that Venezuela's arguments against the validity of the 1897 Treaty of Washington are entirely unsustainable. Venezuela could not help but be aware of each of these alleged deficiencies in the treaty at the time it was being negotiated, agreed, and ratified. Yet, neither in 1897 nor in 1899 did Venezuela give voice to any of these allegations, nor did it do so for another 60-plus years.
In his presentation, attorney at law Paul Reichler focused on Venezuela's past actions. He reminded the court that Venezuela signed the 1897 Treaty of Washington before the arbitration took place. Reichler also argued that Venezuela accepted and relied on the treaty and did not challenge it before the 1899 decision, the 1899 arbitration decision. He pointed to historical records, including diplomatic communications, to show that Venezuela's actions at the time were consistent with acceptance of both the treaty and the arbitration process. Attorney Reichler then questioned how Venezuela could now argue the process was unfair when it had freely taken part in it and freely agreed to it.
How can Venezuela's counsel in 2026 complain that Venezuela was coerced, structurally or otherwise, in the face of this declaration by Venezuela's president in 1897 that Venezuela freely signed the treaty in the absence
Mystical. Yeah, I thought when Mystic that I still could hear the audio. I was saying that I got stuck at the perfect time. So I apologize for the last part there. I was saying that that was some information with regards to what is going on in Guyana, between Guyana and Venezuela. You could see that the case right now has been argued before the International Court of Justice, and they are gonna deliver their final ruling on the matter, where the boundary is gonna be in the coming months. So we're gonna that's something to pay attention to. This is generally about the rich oil deposits that are in the Essequibo region. And even if Venezuela can't use them, still want them. You don't know how that go. I was saying that the guys have been on fire on the topics. They had Dr. Smalls last week. They have the farmer Top Cop this week, and the premiere I think is gonna be next week. So tune into the topics. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. And as I was saying, if you're a revolutionary, you have to constantly educate yourself. So connect with people, be happy, all these things, and hopefully see you next week. And also, for them who is in authority, those who are affecting policy makers, particularly upon the opposition side, the government don't know what happened. They met with the premier team and the government team, the labor team. So they don't know what happening. But for the opposition side, you need to do your research, and there are things in there that you could indicate to the public that I think would be good, not just if you indicate them, but you have a solution. And it also is giving you an idea of the problems that you will be facing going forward. So you need to sound out your maths. But bless up and next week.